Hello friends, fellow artists, and Art League family. This is William McMahon. I am going to be presenting on how to draw a general generic human eye. I hope everyone enjoys the video. Today I'm going to be showing you all a demonstration on how to render a generic human eye. And as I go along further, I'm going to talk about how one is able to personalize an eye and make the eye look as though it belonged to a specific person. But I'm going to address that a little bit later. Whenever I'm drawing eyes, what I like to do is to start out by giving context of drawing the eye socket. And when I think of an eye socket, I conceptualize the eye socket as being sort of a recessed area in the face, and the shape of an eye socket to me is sort of in between a circle and a square. You can think of it as a more organic square or a more geometric circle. You all see, trying to hold my mark making tool closer to the base in order to facilitate longer, looser, lighter marks. For purposes of demonstration, I'm going to be drawing darker than I normally would. I would encourage everyone to keep their drawings as light as possible for as long as possible. So here's my eye socket. I'm going to come in and I'm going to block in my brow ridge. This is going to be the outer eye socket right here. This will transition into the cheekbone. And then from the upper outer corner of the eye socket, if I kind of arc that away, that's going to be the temporal ridge. So if you think of the human head as being more like a rectangle and less of an egg, you can trickle down from your temporal ridge to your brow ridge, to your outer eye socket, to your cheekbone. And that area it kind of distinguishes itself as one plane. You'd have one plane here, one plane here, one plane here, and then one plane for the back of your head, which would be very relevant when you start considering light source. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in a circle, a full sphere. I want people to think of eyes not as being white almond-shaped things, but rather as being full three-dimensional spheres existing in a recessed area, the eye socket, that are then encapsulated by eyelids that have depth and dimension. And if you see here, sketching in this circle, that's one of the things that I would encourage everyone to practice as much as possible. Practice circles. Portrait drawing in general is very difficult, big challenge. And then, and people are going to focus on the eyes. People will say that eyes are the gateway to the soul. So people are going to be paying attention to eyes. Portrait drawing is hard enough. If you can't draw circles, you're fighting a real uphill battle. Really, when you think about drawing a portrait, if you're seeing both eyes with the eyeballs, the iris, the pupil, that's 6 circles that you're going to be rendering. So the better you get at drawing circles accurately and quickly, the more competent you're going to be in portrait drawing and just as a draftsperson in general. So here's my eyeball. What I'll do next is I'll go in and I'll lightly shade across the whole eye socket. This is just a reminder to myself that the whole eye socket is recessed. Go ahead and establish my light source. Put my light source in the upper left. Next, I'm going to find halfway up the eyeball. I'm going to place my tear duct. The tear duct is going to be another sphere. That's going to be beyond the eyeball. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the eye. I'm going to build the eyelids using the tear duct as my point of reference. And now this is something that this is a time where I'd like to discuss a little bit about how to achieve likeness in a portrait drawing. For most people, the lower eyelid rim is going to be just kind of a soft circle for most people. Everything that I'm talking about in this demonstration and in the subsequent demonstrations that I do for general features, or everything is general, generic, not specific. But most people are going to have kind of a soft arc for their lower eyelid rim. The upper eyelid is where we achieve likeness. We want to look at our model and think, okay, where does the upper eyelid peak? Does it peak here? Does it peak here? Does it peak here? How high is that peak? And then how dramatically does the dip come down to connect to the lower eyelid? That's how we kind of achieve likeness in an eyeball. Mine's gonna be general, generic. I'll put the peak around there. I'm kind of stretching here. I really want to feel as though we're wrapping this eyelid around this full sphere of the eyeball, coming down. And then this is my eyeball. I'm going to take my eyelid, I'm going to go beyond the eyeball, I'm going to follow that arc. And again, this is going to be much more beneficial if you have a relatively accurate circle. I'm going to come here, not to a point. Now I'm going to come across. There's huge variation. I call this the soft fleshy patch. This little bit of flesh here, it's a little bit of extra protection for the eye. Huge variation in how prominent people's soft fleshy patches are and the angle in which they exist. Here, okay, lower eyelid. And then one other way to think about achieving likeness in eyes is how much of the iris and pupil are you seeing? Some people naturally look more like this. Yo, what's up, bro? Some people more naturally look like this. And I'm wishing you the best luck in the upcoming fiscal year. I'm going to come, usually you have about the top, about 3/4 of the iris is showing. And usually, generally, generically, the iris is going to end around the lower eyelid rim, around. Another circle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put yet another circle right here for the pupil. Circle inside of a circle. When you start tilting the eyes, which I will do in future demonstrations, these spheres will become ovals or ellipses. Okay. The deepest part of the human face that's not an orifice is the upper inner eye socket. So we want to get in the habit of going nice and dark here. We always want to be mindful of the fact that the eye is wet and reflective. When I'm going to do highlights on the eyeball, I like threes and I like breaking up edges. People have a tendency when they want to do highlights to put one sort of here, one in the middle. To really show the viewer that the eye is wet, it's helpful to break edges with your reflections. To me, when I'm doing a portrait drawing, the darkest spot of my drawing is normally going to be the pupils or one of the pupils. And that's to take the viewer to that spot, make it the focal point. I used to say that the places that you go all the way to black in portrait drawing is pupil, nostril opening, and mouth opening, even if the mouth is closed. Over the years, I've decided to instead encourage people to go darkest right in the pupil. Don't be in a hurry to push your darks, okay? Again, be cautious about pushing. In general, when we're drawing, I would encourage people to stay light, loose, and quick as long as possible in their drawing. Don't focus on details. Don't push values. But for sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and start pushing my values a bit. How would one show what color a model's eyes are in black and white? Trick question. You are not able to do that. What you can do, though, is show the viewer how light or dark someone's eyes are. And the way we do that is how many lines we put in the iris. And we want and really, if you look closely at And an iris, it's a ton of lines kind of pointing in towards the pupil. I used to say, okay, draw on the pupil and then have these lines for the iris radiating out from the pupil. But if you look closely at an eye, you're going to be darker around the edge of the iris. You're going to have actually a little area that's lighter right before you hit the pupil. And then we're just going to have these lines all shooting towards the center of the eye. And sometimes people will think, oh, okay, well, brown eye means dark eye and blue eye means lighter eye. Definitely not the case. It's really just about the intensity of the value, and a good way to check value is to squint at what you're drawing and see what's lighter or darker. Think less about color and more about value. The upper eyelid line here is a line that we can lean on. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we want to think about eyelids having depth and dimension. And by that, I want to show that the upper eyelid is thick enough to cast a shadow onto the eyeball, and conversely, the lower eyelid is thick enough to catch a highlight on the rim because our light source is coming from the upper left. Trusty Tombow. Now, I'm going to keep, if you see, I still have the initial sphere for the eyeball. That can then be minimized, but I have to have that as a reminder that the eye is a full sphere. It is a full three-dimensional sphere, and I'm going to shade it accordingly. Light source upper left. I want to continue to bounce around the drawing and progress the drawing as a whole. Even though I'm just doing a rendering of a single eyeball, I'm still not sticking to any one part. I'm instinctively moving around the drawing, progressing it in a unified manner. Now, again, if I'm doing my soft shading and my contour marks on the eyelid using more horizontal strokes, when it comes to doing the shading on the eyeball, since the eyelid and the eyeball are two distinct entities with a distinct shift from the eyelid onto the eyeball then being wet, glassy, and reflective, I'm going to change the direction of my marks, and I'm going to come and I'm going to do a row of hatching with vertical marks for my cast shadow from the upper eyelid onto the eyeball. We cannot be timid and scared to shade on the eyeball itself. Just because the eyeball is largely a white value, you still need to be comfortable shading on it if you're going to achieve three-dimensionality in your rendering. I'll even throw a little highlight on the tear duct itself. That's a nice detail for the viewer. We look for opportunities to kind of show off and impress the viewer. Things like that are nice details. We pick and choose where we want to show off that sort of thing. Try to achieve different levels of finish in your drawings. Okay, a little more shading onto the eyeball itself. Again, deepest part of the human face other than orifice are going to be the upper inner eye socket. So again, I return there and keep pushing my values to get that richer. Now, again, in order to have a drawing appear the most three-dimensional, you want to have rich darks, bright white values, and then as much of a range of grays as possible in your drawing. That's how you're going to make a drawing or painting that appears the most three-dimensional, is value range. The only way we know where to assign our values is through light source. Leaning here on the upper eyelid, this is a line that we lean on. That's going to set the eyeball back underneath the eyelid. Coming back through here. Nuancing, getting a little more subtle with my rendering and with my value range. Again, I'm conceptualizing the eyeball as a full sphere underneath these eyelids, so I'm shading in a manner similar to how I would a sphere with a light source from the upper left. When it comes to eyelashes and eyebrows, with eyelashes, I would encourage people not to be too precise with the eyelashes. Sometimes people have a tendency to kind of go and say, one eyelash, second eyelash, third eyelash. I try to make the eyelashes a little bit rougher, and in general, we're going to be thicker towards the outer part of the eyelid, and then we're going to get a little bit thinner as we move in towards the center, and then usually we're going to have less prominent eyelashes coming from the lower eyelid rim. Lean on the upper eyelid line. This is another line we can lean on. As I was mentioning before, we're going to try to go ahead and get rid of the outlines on the highlights. Nice distinct highlight in the lower eyelid rim. And for the purpose of the demonstration, I'm drawing on an easel and I'm not rotating my paper. However, in general, when I'm drawing, I rotate my paper all the time. I'm always trying to facilitate comfortable marks. It's important to learn what your most comfortable mark is. Mine is down and towards myself. So I'm rotating my paper regularly so that I can do that mark as much as possible. And again, the more time I spend and the more value range I put in, the more three-dimensional this drawing is going to become. And the only way I can apply my value is through an understanding of light source, the way light hits objects, where highlights are created, where shadows are created on the object, and then where shadows are cast from that object onto other objects. And in general, when I'm drawing anything figure-based, portrait or full figure, I try to think about shapes fitting into shapes. For eyebrow in daily life is not necessarily something that we pay a huge amount of attention to, but when it comes to portrait drawing, finding the shape and the kind of thickness and the angle of eyebrows is very important. What I do is I'm going to block in the shape of an eyebrow. And this is kind of a similar principle to lips, so maybe that's the shape of the eyebrow. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to put my marks for the actual hair using more vertical marks. I change direction as it hits this plane shift. And then I'm going to try to get rid of that outline. And the final steps I'm going to do here are to minimize the edges of the eye socket, soften that down, get rid of the outline on the eyebrow, and then push my value just a tiny bit more to make the drawing pop. All right, come back in, get rid of my edges here. Soften. Pop my distinct highlights. That is largely my formula for creating a general generic human eye that is going to be both representational and appear three-dimensional. Thank you all so much for checking out the video on drawing a human eye from straight on in a general generic manner. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing to our channel, Art League Online. We're working very diligently to try to put out some very informative and hopefully fun content for everyone. We appreciate any likes, any comments. We really enjoy that. So thank you for the support. Thank you for spending the time. Keep drawing. See you next week.